Hello! Today I'm going to be painting with golden open acrylics. In my previous video I painted this flamingo, and in part 2 I have some more paintings to do. So let's not waste any time and let's get into it! Now I know the paints work really well on canvas, but how are they going to go in my sketchbook? Let's find out. Actually, it's going to go over the top of some other paint, which is leftover paint from my video reviewing golden heavy body acrylics. And I'm just going over the top of all of it with the open acrylics because they're perfectly fine together. And I'm using leftover paint on my glass palette, which came from the flamingo painting, because I cannot possibly waste any of this expensive paint. This page spread is an absolute mess at the moment, but it is going to come together quite well once I've finished with it. First up, I'm just using all this leftover paint, and this is from the flamingo part of the painting, and then I'll go in with paint from the little Airtight palette that I'm using. Because I was filming these two videos over a number of weeks, I wanted to store some of my paint in a handy Airtight travel palette, just so then it doesn't dry out and I don't have to worry about leftover paint. And now because this page spread is such a mess, I really wanted to finesse it, so I'm going in with some of the paint that I had in the travel palette, and I'm just making it look a bit more like a painting than the blotchy mess that I'd started out with here. So I'm covering up any white paper and blending colours in together a little bit more. It is going to be kind of a night sky with a little bit of sunset in it, or maybe it's an aurora. I don't even know. It's very abstract, and I wasn't trying to make it anything in particular. It's just a meadow with a sky at the moment. And I decided to get rid of the blue down the bottom because it's just not making any sense. And maybe you can see just how easily these paints are spreading on this paper. They are just so beautiful. Of course, this is going to take quite a while to dry, so I had to leave the book open overnight, and it was pretty much dry by the next day. I could take my time blending the colours here rather than the open body acrylics, which just dried almost immediately when touching the paper. And now I'm painting in some happy little trees. I'm doing a very Bob Ross style painting here. That background is still extremely wet, and I'm going over the top of it with more wet paint. Wet on wet technique is basically what this is. And it's a little challenging not to blend in the background too much with the foreground because I'm picking up some of that background wet paint. But because I'm blobbing the paint on over the top, I'm not getting too much mixing, and it worked out really well. Even though these colours are quite translucent, in particular that yellow, it still actually stood out quite opaquely over the top. Is opaquely even a word? It is now. But what I love about paints like this is that you can go over the top of backgrounds and get those wonderful layers. In watercolour, this is not such an achievable effect, but using gouache or acrylic paint can get this type of effect, or oil paints if you want to leave the book open to dry for much longer than a day. I have tried oil painting in a sketchbook before, and maybe I'll do that in a future video because it is really fun to do, and it's surprisingly easy. I know a lot of people are daunted by oil paints because they think they're really difficult, but actually they're probably easier than watercolours because they're so forgiving to use, as are these open acrylics, because they essentially act in much the same way as oil paints. They take a long time to dry, and so there's plenty of time to add layers and blend paint together and not worry about things drying really quickly and then not being able to blend it in a nice smooth gradient. That's what frustrates me so much with regular acrylics. I'm hopeless with them. I know there are some amazing acrylic artists out there who create some absolutely beautiful paintings. I've never been a fan of acrylic paints myself, except for these. These are my one exception because they do act like oil paints and I love using those. But what I love about these is that you can just use water to wash the brushes off and they don't smell, so they really take the best aspects from both kinds of paints. I had so much fun doing this particular painting. It's so wild and colourful, and I'm glad I was able to continue with the blotchy mess that I originally had, which was all of my leftover paint that I chucked on a page so it wouldn't be wasted. It's nice to do that and then come back to it later and see if you can turn it into some sort of painting, which I did here. And I just kept layering paint on until I was happy, and I was trying to use as much paint up from that palette as I could. There's still heaps left. This paint is such high quality that a little goes a long way. It also spreads really easily, so you don't have to use that much paint to get a big area covered. And then I'm just turning it kind of into a night sky or something. I was just making this one up as I went along. A purely imagination piece. Perhaps it's a landscape on a different planet, but this is the end result. You can see it's still shiny because the paint is still very wet. All of the colours are incredibly vibrant and clean, and I just love how this sketchbook page spread has turned out. And now it's one of the favourites so far that I've done in this mixed media book, which you can see holds acrylic paint incredibly well. But I'm not quite done yet. I have another idea based off this donkey sketch I did in my book recently. I've sketched it onto a little canvas that I had laying around, and I thought this would be a really fun one to paint too. Now I drew this on with a graphite pencil and it is all coming off on my hand, so rather than painting straight onto this canvas, I'm actually just going to cover it with this clear gesso. It's a very smooth gesso and it is transparent, so I could still see my drawing underneath, but it's just going to seal it all in, and then I won't have that graphite contaminating my open acrylics when I start painting with them. I'm being very gentle here, because the gesso will smudge that pencil quite a lot, so I'm just kind of dabbing it on a little bit and trying to get as much of it covered as possible. And if you don't have clear gesso, you can use a kneaded eraser to take off most of the graphite, and that will get rid of all of the smudgy stuff. I've done that before too, but I just decided today I was using my clear gesso and just covering the entire canvas with a thin layer of it. Once again, I'm going to paint directly onto a white canvas, so I'm not adding any tinted underpainting on here. And that's because I want a bright yellow background and I didn't want any underpainting affecting the colour of it. This yellow is incredibly transparent, and so that white is showing through underneath, making it really bold and bright, rather than toning it down with some sort of brown or something behind it. It would have looked hideous. So that's why I'm keeping that white. And I'd run out of yellow in my palette, so I'm just squeezing it directly from the tube so that I'm not putting any yellow on any other palettes, and then I don't have to put that somewhere. I don't know what it is about yellow backgrounds lately that I've really been drawn to them. You'll see another painting I did off camera with a yellow background in a little while as well. It's just so incredibly bright and it makes everything stand out, and I guess I'm channeling kind of a pop art style here. I had a lot of brown and black left over as well, which is why I decided this would be a perfect colour palette for the donkey. And I actually spent quite a lot of time on this painting, adding in a lot of fur detail and things like that, although I'm pretty sure I did all of this in one sitting, so I didn't wait for days in between like I did with the flamingo for layers to dry before adding other ones. This is purely just wet on wet, and I just kept going until I was happy with the painting. It usually depends on the size and type of painting that I'm doing as to whether I'm going to paint it over multiple days and leave layers to dry before adding other ones, or if I'm just going to sit there and do the whole lot in one go, not worrying about underpaintings or anything like that. It's nice to try out different techniques and see what you enjoy the most. This is a very basic colour palette, basically just the blacks and browns, along with that nice light buff titanium which I was using to lighten colours rather than the titanium white, which is a lot brighter. Buff titanium gives more muted highlights and so it looks a lot more natural, and it's one of my go-to colours in a paint palette these days, along with titanium white, because I always have to have that as well, but buff titanium is a close second and I enjoy using it very much. If I was to add any other colours to my collection here, I'd probably pick a purple and maybe an orange, but really I can mix those with the existing colours that I have in this set, so I'm not in a super rush to get any more of them. Every so often I might have an idea for a specific painting where I want a particular colour, and if I don't want to have to keep mixing it, then I'll go out and buy that colour. The teal that I have in this set is an example of that, because it can be mixed, but it's kind of a bit of a pain because you've got to add blue and then a bit of yellow and a bit of white, and it just takes ages. Let me just buy the convenience mix and then I can just have it there. At this point, working on the nose or snout of the donkey, you could probably see how well the colours just blend in with each other, because that paint's still incredibly wet on the canvas and it's going to take hours and hours to dry. I could just take my time and work on the blending as I went, adding in the highlights over the top once I was happy. And these paints are very relaxing to use because you don't have to rush to blend them before they dry really quickly like other acrylics do. And it saves having to take that other step of using slow-drying acrylic medium to mix into all of the paints to begin with. These open acrylics are just ready to go and there's no hassle whatsoever. The colours are all so lovely and rich as well, and I love their consistency. They're not too runny, but they're also not that thick, so they just flow across canvas and paper with a very smooth consistency, much like a hot knife through butter. It's so satisfying. And I love using art supplies that are just easy to use and they feel really great to use. They're nice and smooth, they're not rough and gross. It's just a textural thing, and these pass with flying colours. And I think I've finished extolling all of their virtues. I am not sponsored by Golden in any way. This is all my own opinion, and I've bought all of these colours with my own money. They're just such wonderful paints, I want everyone to know about them. And I genuinely have nothing negative to say about them. They are just that good. The only thing which may be an issue is if you really want a thick texture of paint, then these ones aren't going to do that. But I'm not looking for that with these anyway. I generally don't use a palette knife with these slow drying paints. I will use a brush, and they work well with soft Taklon brushes, so any brush you have is probably going to be fine with these. They don't have to be expensive brushes. Cheaper ones work just as well. And these paints work nicely on canvas, paper and wood, so they're very versatile, much like oil paints really. I had to tilt my painting up here because it was reflecting off the lights, being that the paint is still really wet, and I was just finishing off with a few little details and fixing up any areas that didn't look quite right. This is such an odd angle for this donkey, it's head on, and so it's very strange to paint, but I just love the picture so much. And I'll finish up with the little signature, and I'm pretty much done with this one. So here's the finished painting. It is still very, very wet, and I set this one aside to dry for a couple of days, but I really love how it turned out. It is so cute, and I already have this hanging on my wall in the studio because it's so fun. I did end up painting yellow around the edges of it too, but I just had to let the whole thing dry first before I did that. I still have heaps of leftover paint, and even today there is still some left in here. I'll just quickly show you the one I did off camera. This was in another sketchbook and I painted Trixie. It was just a little afternoon sketch really. The background's actually watercolour on that, but the colour is almost identical to the background on my donkey painting. But these are the two that I did on camera, and I'm really happy with how the paints have performed on all of the surfaces. All of the paintings are incredibly bright, and I just love them so much. These paints are the best things ever, even if they do cost a fortune, and I did get around to painting the edges of the canvas too. So if you've ever wondered if Golden Open Acrylics are worth buying, yes they are, they're fantastic, I love them so much. 10 out of 10, highly recommended. And I hope you enjoyed seeing all of my paintings, and I'd really appreciate a thumbs up because it helps the channel out. You might want to subscribe. Here's part 1 just in case you missed it, and the heavy body acrylics as well. Have a fabulous day, and I'll see you all again in my next video. Swatch you later. Bye!